have a volunteer who has offered to pass the mic around. So if you have a question or a comment or a residence, please raise your hand at this time. I think you stunned them.
Good evening. I've heard it said that Sufism predated Islam, and others say otherwise. Could you comment on that, please?
So the question is whether Sufism predated Islam?
Yes, or what the origin?
Well, I think that could be taken to be true only in the sense of perhaps the ideas and practices that manifest themselves in Sufism were already perhaps present prior to the arrival of Islam. If you could take it that way, then perhaps it could be true. And many think like that. There are people who do think that what we generally call mysticism is actually not confined within a particular religious tradition, but it actually permeates many different religious traditions. So in that sense, I suppose you could say yes. In another sense, however, you would have to say that each time such core ideas and practices manifest themselves, they're specific, they're particular, they take a particular form. And Sufism is the form that it takes within Islam. So in that sense, no, it doesn't predate Islam. It is something deeply and utterly Islamic in that sense. So it can cut both ways.
If I may just add briefly, the majority of the, I could say all of major Sufis, they view themselves as Muslims. So that's important also to see that the view from within of the one who speaks with the voice of the Sufi see themselves, while at the same time they see their practice as transcending the form or being limited to ritualistic aspects of the faith, but they do see themselves rooted deeply within the Islamic tradition.
But do you think there can be a Sufism that is not rooted in Islam?
Well, I think this is my, sorry? Oh, the question is, could Sufism go beyond Islam and be viewed as, like, there are varieties of it practiced in the United States today that acknowledge all kinds of different faiths and practices? So could that be called Sufism? That's a question. Well, I think that you can, as a group, identify yourself as a Sufi and then take aspects of it that you consider acceptable to you. If we look historically as the movement known as the Sufi movement in various parts of the Muslim world, they have been deeply rooted in the Islamic tradition. I don't know if any group would need anyone's permission to call themselves Sufis. They could define their practice as the closest of all to the group they recognize as Sufis. In other words, I think it's a difference between what could be historically defined with what we know as the specificity of the movements versus could there be new manifestations of it, and I don't think there would be any limits on what people can practice and define.
I think we need to keep in mind that all religions evolve and change. I mean, my particular focus is Judaism. I can tell you that, you know, there are some Orthodox Jews who say Judaism has never changed. It's exactly as it was at the beginning. But the truth is that the Judaism of the Bible is completely different than the Judaism of the rabbinic period. And the Judaism of the rabbinic period is completely different than the Judaism of the Kabbalistic period. And the Judaism of the Kabbalistic period is different than the Hasidic Judaism. And all of those Judaisms have very little to do with the current manifestation of Judaism in the Reform and the conservative movements. So religions change, and it's very possible that some people who would, exactly as you said, would keep some elements that they felt comfortable with, that they identified as Sufi, and then drop other elements, that could be even major elements, that they felt uncomfortable with, and let them go. So I think that we need to just recognize that religions change, and that's a fact of life.
There is another possible analogy, and that is the phenomenon of yoga. Yoga originates in Hinduism, but there are two branches of yoga, Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, and I think practitioners of yoga who consider it a spiritual tradition without necessarily being Hindu would tell you that, yes, there is yoga outside Hinduism. So I think on that analogy, you could say that there's Sufism outside of Islam, or could be.
It seems to me that the religions meet in mysticism. And you have talked about how Sufis feel they are part of Islam. But my understanding is that, as is the case in every religion, there is a strain where those who are not mystically oriented, those who you might call more organized in their religion, are not necessarily accepting of mysticism. How do we bring the organized religion people to this oneness that we find in the mystical traditions? And as part of that, what is the standing of Sufism within Islam? What is Rumi's standing within Islam? We talked about how Sufis feel they're part of Islam. Do traditional Muslims feel that Sufis are part of Islam?
Just a couple of difficult questions, but let me start with the last one you asked in terms of the position or the location of Sufism within Islam. And I could give you a number of answers, but the short answer is that historically, once Sufism developed and blossomed into a major form of piety from within Islam, irrespective of whatever the influences were, once that happened within the first 4 centuries of Islamic history, then Sufism became what we could call today mainstream. And it really permeated practically all aspects of Muslim life for all kinds of Muslims, whether they are from the most law-abiding, divine law-bound types to more popular forms of Islam, where perhaps the doctors of, the scholars of law were never really even heard of. And Sufism permeated, and Sufi practice and ideas permeated all that. And it's only in the last 2 centuries that we have begun to hear very loud voices from within Sufi, from Muslims, more, shall we call them, puritanical-minded types, who have cried out that Sufism is not really Islamic. But historically, that's the picture that I'm giving you. So the answer is, the short answer to the question is, what is the reception of Sufism by Muslims, is that historical answer is Sufism is deeply and rooted in Islam, is a mode of piety that deeply permeates all aspects of Muslim life. So the answer is yes. That's the first question, whether one can bring together mystical impulses, shall we say, with more other more what you characterized, I suppose, as establishment or organized religion of one kind or another. And I think history again provides answers to that, and the answer is most definitely yes. It is not as if a mystical form of life is definitely or necessarily at odds with organized form of any other organized form of worship or piety. And in fact, I think the idea is that they go very much hand in hand. In the case of Islam, I think as a mystical form of piety and what could be considered a more, let's say, law-bound in the case of Islam, law-abiding form of piety actually are the two wings for the believer. The believer needs both. The believer needs both to be unfettered and unshackled and led by love, while at the same time the believer needs to live in society, observe norms of sociability, friendship, and morality, and for that he needs perhaps another wing. And without either of them, you can't really fly, would be, I suppose, my answer.
I think I can add to that when we say Sufism, very often we think of one kind of approach, but Sufis really have a wide range themselves. You can see some very law-abiding and textually oriented, and some who basically at this other end would be completely ecstasy and not consider the legal tradition or the practice, the ritualistic practice as important. So it's important to recognize that there are all kinds of Sufis. Rumi falls really somewhere in the middle. If you read his MacEnulty, which is the compendium of speculative mysticism, it's actually known as the Quran in Persian, the Persian Quran. He calls it the Persian Quran, and the Persian speakers know it as such, because it's in fact totally imbued in Quranic verses, in sayings of the Prophet, goes through debates, but at the same time, he tries to show different aspects of that same debate. Now, if you go to his Divan, which is the lyric poems, then you see a different face of him. And if you read the discourses, of which I quoted some, you see yet another face of him. So I would say it's important to see the diversity within the Sufi mystical movement and the fact that it's not just one thing. As far as Rumi himself is concerned, he is one of the most highly revered figures among the Muslims. To this day, probably in Iran, one of the topics that gets more published than any other is the life and writings of Rumi. Coleman Barks was given an honorary degree in Tehran University 2 years ago for his translations of Rumi. And so it's even people whom we may view as being literalist or more ritualistic, they do also have all kinds of ties with the way he approaches, because he speaks to such a wide range of people.